Zach LaVine, I would make the argument that just in terms of score, not offensive player, because his playmaking, like his passing isn't on the level of like Luka and Trey, all that, but just in terms of raw scoring, I could see him become a top 5 player.
Let's actually pivot more into the Chicago Bulls, because they, the biggest storyline hanging over them this entire season is going to be Zach LaVine. He's going to be up, he is a free agent next summer. They could have renegotiated and extended his contract this year if they carved out enough cap space. They instead decided, no, let's prove to Zach that we're serious about winning. Let's do what the Hawks did last offseason with Trey and bring in a ton of talent while we still can before this big contract kicks in for Zach. So they add DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso, among other players, Derrick Jones Jr. as well. How do you see these new pieces fitting in with the current core?
Well, I mean, it's not a perfect roster, but I like just the raw talent upgrade of it. I think there is a lot of logic in having a secondary playmaker and also a tertiary playmaker. Now, LaVine was basically the de facto point guard in a lot of stretches during last year. I know people will point to Tomas Satoransky and Kobe White, but Satoransky really didn't play a whole lot, and Kobe was just better suited spotting up. He wasn't really a traditional point guard. So it just left LaVine with a lot of possessions where he had to be both the initiator and the scorer, and the offense could get a little bit stagnant there. Now you have Lonzo Ball. Now you have DeMar DeRozan. Hell, to some extent, you even have Alex Caruso, and you still have Kobe White on the roster. That means that now ball handling is just going to be that much more spread out. I would also argue that the presence of Nikola Vucevic still looms large because he is one of the best passing centers in the entire league. So there's just so much, what's the word I'm looking for here? Ammunition around LaVine that can sort of pass him the ball and get him shots in the right places. So I think the Bulls upgraded tremendously. I think they put the right pieces around him. Now, am I saying that this is the roster that they're going to go into 5 years from now? No, I'm not, because both DeMar and Vooch are both on the older side. But this should be enough talent for Zach to see that they're serious for him to also want to re-up next summer.
Yeah. And then there's been a lot of focus on the defense of the Bulls, because a lot of these guys, LaVine, Vooch, DeMar DeRozan, are all pretty offensive minded. I mean, Lonzo's a good defender. Caruso is a great defender. So it's not to say they have zero defense. And then Patrick Williams as well showed some flashes there as a rookie. But how concerned should we be about, is their defense what's going to hold this team back this year?
No, this was the inevitable criticism, and honestly, I'm a little bit tired about this, and it's not just for the Bulls, for every team that is offensively minded. People immediately go to, what about the defense in an era where offense is king? I mean, not to say that defense isn't important, but it's not half the game. You and I have had this conversation numerous times, so I don't think it's an issue. I think there are plenty of players on the roster currently constructed that can be average to slightly above average defenders. And then you brought up Alex Caruso, who could be he is already one of the best point of attack defenders in the entire league. So he would come in with a great injection of defensive talent and upside in that regard. You also saw how Zach LaVine bought into defense during the Olympics. He also got better last year, but somehow that was missed by the national media because nobody watched the Bulls, which I don't blame anyone for that, but he is better. DeMar DeRozan is definitely a weak link. I think Vucevic is better than what people give him credit for, but he's not good. I compare him a little bit to Pau Gasol in the sense that as long as he drops, he's okay. But if he comes out to show and has to follow around guards 18 feet from the basket, that's a problem. To me, I'm looking, you've actually brought him up, Patrick Williams. He is going to have a lesser offensive role. I think he's going to be more of an opportunistic scorer. That means that he can put a lot of emphasis on the defensive end of the court. It means he can reserve a lot of energy to being that defender. He's got great size. He's 6'8", 235, quick feet, athletic, strong, like built like an ox, really. So there's just so much potential on that end of the floor there. Then you have Derrick Jones Jr. coming off the bench. You have Tony Bradley, who's a shot blocker. You have Troy Brown Jr., who made great leaps as a defender last year. So I think the problem is overstated. Now, are they going to finish in the top 5? No. Could they rank below league average? Yes, absolutely. But I don't fear them finishing 30th, for example. Like last year's team, which wasn't really good, finished 12th. Like Billy Donovan is one of the better defensive-minded coaches in the entire NBA. I just think overall, when you look at all those things, it doesn't add up to the concerns of people saying, oh, they could have the league's worst defense. No, I don't think that's true at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, it might not even matter. Like, I don't think they're going to field a top below average, even if they're in the high teens, low 20s, let's say. As you said, it might not matter because they have so much offensive upside that maybe they just get into these run and gun first to 130, first to 140 type of games. And, maybe that's what ends up costing them in the playoffs. But I don't think anyone is looking at this Bulls team as a legitimate championship contender this year anyway. This is like a stepping stone year where you add all of these pieces and then you see how they fit together. And ultimately, all of this is to convince Zach LaVine class is looking mediocre at best. It's like Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine, and then there is a significant drop off now that we've seen, Aaron Gordon's off the market, Terry Rozier's off the market, Julius Randle's off the market. It's like Gary Harris is going to be one of the best free agents next summer, So like all of these teams are going to be going after Beal and LaVine. And if the Bulls didn't make that type of a move, maybe LaVine does start to develop a wandering eye and say, like, oh, okay, I'm not convinced that the Bulls have put the right pieces around me. Right. So I think they made big strides toward keeping him with these moves. We'll see how it all actually fits together. Offensively, I'm curious to see how you see this thing shaking out. Like, what is the pecking order there? Or does it matter? Like, will there be games where Vooch is the offense flows through Vooch one night and then flows through DeMar one night and flows through Zach one night. Hell, flows through Lonzo one night.
Vooch, DeMar, and Zach have all had years of averaging 23 or more points per game. Like they've been there. Like DeMar and Zach have both crossed 27 points per game. Like they've been the high level scorers on their team where they haven't necessarily met expectations from a team perspective. So I would be inclined to believe that they are just basically saying, look, whoever has the best shot. If someone has a good night, that's what we're running through. Let's just make proper reads. Let's just make the right offensive execution. If that means less shots to go around for the top stars, fine. That doesn't really matter. I think LaVine especially is more key or more interested overall in like team success compared to individual statistics. And I think DeRozan is somewhat of the same ilk. I mean, he said as much when he was, I don't remember the name of the show with that Gilbert Arenas is hosting, but he was on that show and he basically said as much. Like he wants a winning situation. So I think that is what they're trying to achieve. I think this is going to be a by committee thing. Now, do I think that Zach LaVine is going to settle for 18 points per game? No, because I still think he is by far the best player on the team. So more often than not, the guys who has it going is going to be Zach LaVine. Right. What is really interesting to me is Zach as an off-ball player. So he actually ranked extremely well as a spot-up shooter and as a cutter, just moving off the basketball, which it's kind of funny to me how the national media once again kind of said, well, can Zach LaVine really play with a ball handling guards alongside him? yeah, every statistical measure is basically saying, yeah, he can. He's really good in that role. And now he actually has smarter playmakers who can find him in the right spots. I could see a scenario where Zach is going to take an even larger uptick in threes, but they're going to be more open and less contested, which should be a major boon to Chicago's offense. And I could see him cut to the basket a lot more with either Lonzo or DeMar kind of setting things up. So I expect just an insanely efficient year from Zach, which is saying something because last year he had a year that could only be compared to the primes of Steph and KD efficiency-wise. So offensively, I think they're on the right track here.
Yeah. I mean, Vooch is a great passer too. Like,
correct.
They have, if the trend that we've been seeing in the NBA is we need more than one playmaker on the floor, you could argue the Bulls are going to start the season with 4. Really everyone but Patrick Williams, you can feel comfortable as being like, the focal point of a specific possession where it's not just you pass the ball to this guy and this guy is not going to look to any of his teammates like a Hassan Whiteside black hole. They just don't have that. They have so many guys who can create both for themselves and others. I agree with you. Zach LaVine is the best offensive threat on this team, and I think he's going to lead the team in scoring. His efficiency last year, as you mentioned, he averaged more than 27 points per game, shot almost 51 overall, 42 from 3, 85 from the line. Like, that is absurd considering how bad the rest of the team was. Now that he has better teammates around him, teams are going to have to devote more defensive attention, especially to Vooch. DeMar is not much of a three-point threat, but he's developed into a hell of a playmaker, especially in the last couple of years. Lonzo is inconsistent as a three-point shooter, but he takes enough shots that you have to at least respect him from that range. Also, just an absolute monster in transition. So I am very bullish, no pun intended, but I'm bullish on the Bulls this year. I think they are going to be really fun to watch. We'll have our league pass rankings out soon, and I'm sure both of us are going to have them pretty high up on the board.
Have them higher. Spoiler.
There you go.
Yep.
I like the depth that they have behind these guys, like a Caruso, Kobe White backup backcourt is really good. I know you've been hammering this point, especially on Twitter, where it's like they were trotting out, like Denzel Valentine a couple years ago. And now we're talking Caruso, Kobe White, Troy Brown Jr.,
Tony Bradley as well instead of Cristiano Felicio.
Right. And Derek Jones Jr. That's a great 10-man rotation. So where do you see the Bulls fitting in the overall Eastern Conference hierarchy? Do you think they are a pretty clear top 6 seed? Do you think they're going to wind up in the play-in tournament? Or God forbid, are they, despite all of these offseason changes, are they going to miss out on the playoffs?
Well, so before I answer that, I will say they also have Alice Johnson, who has played well in limited minutes. Now, granted, he doesn't have a long history of playing major minutes, so he is still sort of a project. But should he play well, you could always pivot away from Derek Jones Jr.'s expiring contract, which is 9-point-something million, and they still have some movable draft picks. So we could still see a midseason trade that actually gives them even more ammunition. If they do that, that would also going to change the answer to the question that you asked. But even without changes, I think they should be in the playoffs. I'm not saying 3rd seed or anything of that sort, but the 6th seed seems right. And if they do better, that wouldn't shock me. If they end up in the play-in tournament, that also wouldn't shock me. You don't know what's going on with injuries. The East also got better from top to bottom. That matters. It means that they are going to be playing just a hell of a schedule all the way through, because East teams, surprisingly, play more against East teams than West teams. So the competition level is going to be intense every single night. But I think the talent level is just good enough for them to overcome that. I would be shocked if they missed the playoffs outright, finished 11th or 12th, something along those lines. That would be a tremendous shock, and it would be that would be headline worthy. So I'm not looking at that scenario. I think the 6th seed is kind of where I expect them to be.
Yeah, I feel clearly Brooklyn and Milwaukee are the top 2.
Yes.
I think Miami, I feel comfortable pegging as a top 6 seed. You know, we'll see what happens. The Ben Simmons saga continues forever, so we'll see what happens with Philly. Atlanta, I think there's no reason to think they're going to be worse than they were last year. So that puts Chicago probably in the 6, 7, 8 mix with, I'd say Boston's in there, New York's in there, but I put Chicago above the Raptors for now, above the Pacers for now, above the Wizards, above the Hornets. So I do think, ceiling is probably 5 or 6 seed. I'm guessing they still wind up in the play-in tournament, but I do think they have the talent, assuming health. I think they will be back in the playoffs this year. And I think they could be a pretty scary draw for one of these top few seeds, honestly.
Yeah, I would, regardless of where they land, I would not want to play the Bulls in the playoffs at all. They just have so much firepower right now. This is a team that will be able to go out and give you 140 points when everything is clicking. And Zach LaVine, I don't think we spend enough time talking about how much better he's gotten. Remember, he was the guy that everyone was kind of like poo-pooing for a long time. Hell, I was one of those people. The leaps that he's taken in recent years while nobody's been watching is quite substantial, and there's nothing to indicate that he won't take another leap this year. I mean, I would make the argument that just in terms of score, not offensive player, because his playmaking, like his passing, isn't on the level of like Luka and Trey, all that, but just in terms of raw scoring, I could see him become a top 5 player.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't far off last year, right?
Right, exactly. And I think he could solidify himself as that this year, like as a no-nonsense, like one of the world's best scorers. Like, I think when his career is said and done, it's going to be looking a little bit similarly like Carmelo Anthony, like one of those, someone who can really just get buckets. Now, then you take into account like what about efficiency and all those things. But I think Zach is going to go down with one of those reputations as one of the better scorers in NBA history.
Yeah, I mean, the wild thing is that he's really, outside of the first season in Chicago, his scoring output has increased every year of his career.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see that.